There we go. Barry is an expert in safety for workplaces, and he's developed a system for safety in times of COVID. So welcome, Barry. I'm looking forward to talking to you about this.
Thank you very much. It's much more than safety. What it is, it's a unique, one-of-a-kind system that will actually influence the workers at whatever company we're working with to actually embrace the new habits that you want them to do. Because knowledge is useless unless people actually apply it on a daily basis, year after year.
Right, right. It's not just a one-time thing. It's building a habit, building a whole culture, right?
Right, and it's even more than building a habit. It's proactively influence. If you have 500 workers, how do you proactively influence 500 individuals to actually embrace this? Because with COVID, you have 500 healthy people. If one person has COVID symptom-free, they could be spreading it around the workplace for weeks, and everything seems fine. Then all of a sudden, one day, 500 people, 50 or 60 people get sick. And the next week, another 50 or 60, and the next week, the company shut down because of so much COVID.
Right.
So,
and of course,
there's no room for error. Everybody must be applying the safe habits on a daily basis, because it's not just about not getting the virus. It's also about not invisibly spreading it around so other people can unknowingly get the virus.
right. And that work environment isn't just where it ends, because all the people who work with you have families at home, and other people perhaps in elder and high risk categories where, it's not just 50 or 60 people getting sick, it's other people at home dying.
Well, not just that, but let's look at from the company's point of view. Of course, the company cares about the workers, and the company cares about the workers' families. But the workers' home is actually, when it comes to the virus, an extension of the workplace. Because if something happens and there's a virus, whether there's symptoms or not, in the home, that worker will then potentially bring the virus to the workplace and will spread around. So
Right.
it's not optional. It's necessary that you provide the information to influence and train the workers' families to also be safe.
So right now we've been in this since March, basically. It's now August, and there is no end in sight. I mean, how long do we see this going on? COVID.
That's a very controversial question, because here's the reality. If you have 1,000 people that are healthy and virus-free and symptom-free, and they're practicing safe habits, they wear a mask and they quarantine, and they're careful who they interact with. When they go out shopping, they're very careful to do all the right things. And then one person who has not been safe, whether it's innocent or not, who has been in contact with someone with COVID, they're symptom-free, and they come into that group. Now that entire group could be as a ground zero. The virus could be spreading through them. So look at a country like New Zealand. New Zealand had the virus worse than America. And in 65 days, after they first got a severe number of cases going up and deaths going up, in 65 days, it was over. And they've now gone 100 days as of today without a single person getting it from somebody else in New Zealand. And what they did was they basically did the proper steps to not spread the virus from one person to another, and which we'll be discussing, I'm sure, in the next few minutes. But Andrew, if it's okay with you, could I share how I developed this unique system and why it's so unique and why it's so effective?
Yeah, please do.
I began my career, obviously, 17 years ago, and not preventing COVID. I began my career going into large companies and developing programs to reduce injury and increase productivity. And I put together a really good program that taught people all the right things, and it worked fantastic temporarily. And I looked around at every company out there. I don't care how good they were and how good their results were. The results were temporary. So what I did was I thought, how could I influence the workers, all the workers, to actually use what we're teaching them on a daily basis, year after year after year. So what we began to do was when we train people with a technique called behavior modification training. It's a way of training people so they really understand why. You don't just tell them to do something, tell them it's good for them. We explain it to them in such a way they understand why it's beneficial and how they will personally benefit. We don't say you must do it. We then give them the option if they're going to do it or not. And if you present it properly, showing what the benefits are and what the personal benefits are, they will always make a choice to embrace the habits. People don't like being told what to do. Even if they think something is good, if you tell someone to do something, they often will reject it. But if you can lead them to choose to do it themselves, well, they don't argue with themselves, and so they're willing to do it. But even with all of that done, we've now influenced them, we've trained them, we've motivated them, and a couple months later, they begin to slip back to their old habits because people are addicted to their old habits. So we then put in place a very easy to implement reminder system, which takes anywhere from 10 seconds to 2 minutes on a daily basis. So every worker has some mini reminder of something they learned in the original training, which number one, makes them feel the company cares about them. Number two, reminds them, oh yeah, I forgot about that. And number three, keeps it constantly top of mind. And as a result of this, we've been doing injury prevention for 17 years. And for 15 years, we've had a 100% success with an average 50 to 90% injury cost reduction. It's unheard of numbers. Now, that said, when COVID came in, all the companies that I consulted for have pretty much shut down. So I looked to see how could I use these skills to benefit society and also, of course, to earn a living for myself, COVID. So we take the exact same skills that we use to influence people to embrace and then consistently and daily utilize the habits that will eliminate injuries. And we created this exact same system with all the habits that eliminate people possibly getting, giving, or spreading COVID to each other, to the company, or to their family.
This is so great because I find myself already when I'm interacting with other people, masked or not, you've got the temptation to hug or shake hands. You've got all these temptations to slip back into your old patterns. And especially if you start to socialize normally with a certain group of people, the tendency to not check, to not ask rude questions about where's that person been and whatnot, this is probably going to be a challenge for most of us to actually make the transition from what once was to what is now the reality.
One of the greatest dangers of COVID is this. Number one, it's extremely contagious. Number two, it's extremely contagious from people that have no symptoms. Either they never will have symptoms, or they're symptomatic, or they're non-symptomatic and spreading it for several weeks before they get sick. So that's the first thing, very contagious, and it's being spread by people that have no symptoms, who don't know they're spreading it. And the third thing is, with most people, 80% of the people that get it, it's like a mild cold or a very mild flu. It's no big deal. But here's the reality. I think as of today, 180,000 people in America, that's a lot of people, have died. That's more people than have died from this disease in 10 other countries combined. 100,000 small businesses, because of COVID, are closed down and they will never reopen. Tens of thousands of companies across America with 500 employees or more are either have reduced operations or they're shut down, and they don't know if they're going to be opening up again or not. And every single day in the news, you see more and more of these large international companies that are going into bankruptcy because of COVID. And the problem is, it's mild in most people, it's non-symptomatic, and you're spreading it. And and it's highly contagious. So that goes back to what you're saying. Hey, my friends, I feel healthy, and my friends all look healthy. I miss them. I love them. So let's give them a hug. You can't
Yeah.
do that. We have to have a new paradigm on how we interact with people. Now, what I personally do is I create social pods, and we teach to do this in the workplace also. So in my social pod, I have a few people, and we communicate with each other before we get together that we have been in absolute quarantine for 2.5 weeks, which is a little bit more than they say that you need to do, and everybody gets a COVID test. If everybody gets a COVID test within the last week and they've had no contact with anybody for 2.5 weeks and they're symptom free, we're comfortable getting together socially. We teach the same thing in the workplace. Limit the number of people that interact with each other. And that way, if someone does get sick, you know exactly who to go to potentially quarantine. So it'll stay only within that pod in your workplace and not spread throughout the entire plant. There's a lot of things that you could do to function normally, to live normally and socially, well, sort of normally, yet be very confident and predictable that you're not going to get or spread the virus.
Right. This is wonderful. It's kind of like like you're creating separate chambers for contagion, so that it's just you can't spread without, it can't spread to to massive groups. If you've got people in smaller groups,
Right.
you can isolate it once it does reach in.
Right. We have one client that makes aerospace parts, and we train them for, we went down to evaluate their workplace to develop a customized program because of what they do. They've got some unique situations that could potentially cause a spread of the virus. For example, an item which they're creating has to go through 8 processes, which is 8 people. In fact, more than that. The person who receives it, and then it goes through 8 processes through 8 people. Then the person who's going to ship it out. That's 10 people everything goes through. Each time it travels, it's potentially bringing invisible virus with it to the next person. So we're evaluating this workplace, and we walk by the lunchroom, and they have 150 employees. What do we see? 150 people squeezed into the lunchroom. What? That's insane. So we simply said, why don't you stagger and have 3 separate lunch shifts and have the people spread out at lunch, and just put pieces of tape down for where people can sit so they're not so close together. You'll tremendously decrease the possibility of them spreading. So it's simple little things like that that you can do so you can continue to function and reduce or even eliminate the possibility of spreading the virus.
Right, and that's really the name of the game. It's reducing probability, because in most cases there's no way to get 100% zero risk.
You know what? I disagree. I think you can get down. I think you can get down to zero risk. Here, let me give you an example. You have a worker. They show up at work. They spray down their entire workstation with a disinfectant. My favorite one is 70% isopropyl alcohol, but whichever one you decide to use is fine. It's now a completely safe environment, correct?
Well, the desk,
because there's no virus there. But somebody comes by to talk to them socially or to do some business, and they put down a coffee cup or they put down a tool, and then they leave. Are they still in a clean environment? Potentially no, because that coffee cup or that tool that was not under their direct control could have invisibly been covered in virus. So here's all they need to do. Spray, 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 spray. I'm finished. Where it touched is you've now eliminated the virus. The virus cannot move on its own. The virus cannot move on its own. It's only moved by people moving it. So if somebody puts a tool down covered in virus and then they leave, all you had to do was spray the spot where the tool was lying, and now you're safe. Now you're walking around the plant. We're talking about a business environment now. You're walking around a plant, and you're going to be touching doorknobs, handrails, light switches, faucets in the sink, the handle for flushing a toilet. Every one of these things could have virus on it. How do you touch all these things and you're safe? Everybody should have a small spray bottle of disinfectant. And when I walk up to a door handle, I just go to the doorknob, spray, spray, spray. It's clean. The light switch, spray, spray, spray. It's clean. Or simply touch whatever you want and don't touch your face and don't touch anything in your workstation until you've washed your hands. Now, that's an important one.
Yeah,
People,
that's what I do at the grocery store. Is I basically say, okay, my hands are now a toxic environment. I don't touch anything but the groceries. And once I get to my car, I wipe down my hands with disinfectant wipe before I get into my car.
right, either disinfectant or soap. They do the same thing. And the reason the soap is so effective is the virus is actually very fragile. The outer layer of the virus is made of fats. The second that soap touches that virus, the outer layer, which is a membrane, breaks down and the virus is dead. That's why water is no good. It is soap. Soap is the key, or disinfectant. And when you're disinfecting or you're using soap, you have to, it's not, people say do it for 20 seconds. Say, sing happy birthday twice. That's actually misleading advice. What's important is that you get it to every part of your body, of your hands, your palms, between your fingers, the back of your hands, your fingernails, your fingernails. Look how much time that took me. I just put the soap or disinfectant everywhere. And I also suggest your thumb, because you use your thumb so much and you don't get your thumb that good when you're cleaning your hands like this. And further, you see, I'm wearing a watch and I'm wearing a little bracelet, and I'm not wearing a ring, but some people wear a ring. When you're in the work environment interacting with people, do not wear any jewelry, because the jewelry is someplace the virus can wind up being harbored underneath of it. You should even have short sleeves or sleeves pulled up and clean up almost to your elbow.
Now, the other real major issue that people need to understand, of course, is the droplets, the respiratory droplets. And there's two types of droplets, right? There's the ones that are ballistic, sort of shoot out, and they kind of hit some part of your hand or your face. And then there's the aerosol droplets, which basically are invisible and hang in the air for a much longer period of time.
Well, they're all invisible, but here is the science. When you talk or when you even breathe, droplets come out. And there's three sizes of droplets. Heavy droplets, which fall and land in contaminated surface within 3 feet. Middle-sized invisible droplets, which land within 6 feet. That's where that whole concept of the 6-foot social distancing comes from, because those heavy and middle-sized droplets are the highest concentration that's coming out of you. And if you're a loud environment and you're talking louder, it's 8 feet. It goes further. If you're exerting and you're breathing heavier, it's 8 feet, because they go further. Now, in addition to those heavy droplets, you have micro droplets, which is what you're referring to. The micro droplets, and then they're all invisible. The micro droplets float in the air for 30 to 60 minutes, and they're moved by airflow. They can go 100 feet. Now, in all three of these areas, 3 foot, 6 foot, and 50, 80, 100 feet, if somebody now walks by while they're still in the air and they breathe, they can breathe in the virus. They've got the virus inside their body. And on top of that, 3 feet, 6 feet, 100 feet, eventually the virus settled down on a surface. And the virus will live on a soft surface like cloth, paper, or cardboard for up to 12 hours. It'll live on a hard surface like metal, glass, or plastic for up to 3 days. So from the aerosol, it's not only about what you breathe, it's also about it's causing a settling on the surface. So here's a simple thing. Assume anything that has not been under your direct control is contaminated, and treat it as such. That just means if you touch it, disinfect your hands before you touch your face. And if you're working somewhere, let's go back to that guy who disinfected his workstation. We talked about if somebody puts down a tool or a coffee cup and then leave, that could have been contaminated. That spot's contaminated. How about this? How about the fact that it's in a work environment and there's 50 people that are in this gigantic room? they're all breathing. Even the ones with masks, once in a while, may take it off to, to be heard more clearly. And there's potentially micro droplets floating in there, and they can land. So we advise people that every 1 to 2 hours, re-disinfect your entire workstation, because there could have been drifting micro droplets that landed in your workstation. Now, if you touch it and then touch your face, you've given yourself a virus.
Okay. So, and then the other thing with the aerosol droplets, of course, is that it's in the office space, right? So even if your cubicle is shielded off, or if you even have a private office, you still have the issue of these clouds of vapor, basically, just drifting toward you walking through it. And so how do you deal with how do you get a feeling of safety in an office environment where you really can't check where everyone's been in your office?
It's really any environment where you have multiple people. Now, at home, when you're with people that you live with and you're all living quarantine safe, it's not an issue. But in a grocery store, in a hardware store, and in an office or industrial environment, there is the potential of those microbes all through the air. The only way you have to prevent yourself from getting from breathing them in is to wear a mask. Now, in general, there's two kinds of masks: the medical and non-medical masks. Medical masks like the N95. N95 has been proven you put out the least amount of virus, and there's the least amount of chance of taking virus in. There was a study done that was released just within the last 48 hours, testing a number of masks. Masks like bandanas and knit masks. And you can Google this and actually see pictures that were done inside a chamber with laser beams. So they light up the droplets and took pictures of it. You can see this. Very thin, one layer of cotton masks. The virus are going out as if there's no mask there whatsoever. In fact, there's more micro droplets because as it passes through, they become smaller. And when you're breathing in, they can pass through it very easily. But these, a thicker cotton mask, even these homemade masks, if they're thick cotton, then you're taking a minimal amount in. The ultimate safety to not take it in is to wear an N95 mask. What I personally do is I wear how do I say this? I wear a nice comfortable mask, and I take an N95 mask and make a slit in it, and I slip it inside my mask. So I'm now wearing a mask where I'm able to breathe, goes over my entire face, but there's an N95 mask inside of it. And if you were to go online to look at all the masks being sold, look for a mask which is sold, a cloth mask which is sold and has an envelope that you can slide something into.
Great. That's great. So now, for someone at home who's trying to have interaction with people unmasked, you're going to have to sort of figure out how to create a quarantine, right? How to create a protocol so that you're all essentially safe and not spreading it to each other. So how do you go about helping people figure out what kind of communication and protocols they need to set to
Are you talking about amongst friends?
Yeah. How do you?
It's actually easy and predictable. Assume that every person that you meet could have the virus. So the people you're going to interact with socially. I had a social event last Thursday. 8 of us got together, and all 8 people were in communication and committed to seeing nobody except their significant other or whoever they live with for a week and a half. And everybody got a COVID test 1 week before we met. We felt pretty comfortable getting together. Indoors, we all wore masks. Outdoors, we stayed 10 feet apart, not even 6 feet, 10 feet apart, and we did not wear masks. So it's predictable. You simply need to not bathe yourself. You simply need to, number one, stack the cards the people you're with are not infected. I've seen no other people for 2.5 weeks, and I've had a COVID test last week and a half, that's a safe person to hang out with. And you still want to wear a mask if you're indoors at this time of this pandemic. Can I go back a little bit? We're talking about the office environment where there is microbes floating around. I talked about what the safe thing being being wearing a mask. There is one more thing you can do. In your ventilation system, have outside air being dumped in. That dilutes the air, so there's less virus. Also, it's going to be sucking some air out by a HEPA, H-E-P-A, a HEPA filter to put in there. A HEPA filter is capable of clearing out even the virus. So if you're in the ventilation system in your office or in your industrial environment, you're bringing in outside air, which dilutes the air in there. So it's less thick of virus potentially. And the air being sucked out goes through a HEPA filter, then that's tremendously decreasing your chance of getting it in that work environment. I apologize for going off subject.
No, let me just add to that too. I've seen that there are some, if you don't have a control of your office environments, air filtration system, and I mean, a company should obviously take that very seriously at this point in time. But if you are just an individual, you could get, I've seen them, there's sort of smaller HEPA filter systems that can basically circulate air pretty rapidly. You can even have them on Wi-Fi, so you could have it basically start cleaning your office room an hour before you show up to make sure that the air in your specific office is essentially HEPA filtered before you get there.
I am familiar with the existence of what you're talking about, but I actually have not looked at any studies and just how effective they are. They may be incredibly effective, but I'm a scientist. I'm a doctor and I'm a scientist. So I want to see the documentation and the actual tests were done to make sure it's really doing a good job. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. It may be fantastic. It's just they're asking me a question. I don't know because I haven't seen the research.
Right.
On how effectively they clean out the room. Bottom line, we're an N95 filter. They're not expensive. And now, even though people say they're not available, they're available. Just go online.
Okay. So a lot of offices are taking people's temperature before they come in. Is that a really effective approach to this?
Yes and no. In New Zealand, which I mentioned earlier, one of the ways they stopped it was every single person who came into the country, they tested them to see if they were sick and they put them in quarantine for 2 weeks. Now, let's go to a business. What I teach my clients to do is every single person that comes in, as they come in, they now have these guns that will check your temperature, and you aim them without touching them at the person, and you now know the temperature. Anyone who's got a temperature has to go home. Now, you also ask them a couple of questions. Is anyone in your home sick? Have you or anybody in your home been in contact with anybody who is sick? And do you have any flu symptoms of any kind, no matter how mild? All of those answers being yes means they go home for 2 weeks. Now, that said, that's a big, here's what most people are going to do. Unless there's some financial lifeline set up for them to survive while they're home in quarantine, they're going to lie and say they're fine because people need to financially survive. Right. So for a company to get people to be honest and go home and go into quarantine, which will protect the whole company from shutting down, it'll save the company millions of dollars potentially, or even not surviving by keeping somebody who potentially has a virus from coming into the company. So the company needs to have some kind of a safety net for people who go home in quarantine. The same thing for any visitors to your company. When somebody comes to your company to do some kind of business, do the same thing. But before you ask them questions and take their temperature, ask them why they're there. That way, if they have a temperature, or if they answer yes to any of those questions, you can still fulfill their needs, even though you're going to deny them entry into your business, because they've got a boss who sent them there to do something. And if you deny them entrance, they're getting in trouble with their boss. So you know what they're going to do? They're going to lie. They're not going to tell the truth because they've got to get in so they don't get in trouble. So you've got to make sure you know what their needs are so you can fulfill them, even if you're going to deny them entrance. So workers or visitors.
So,
what I'm describing this?
yeah, this is great. This is great. So let's talk a little bit more about the strategy in the workplace for going beyond this. So you're basically testing people when they come in to see if they have any symptoms. You're asking them if they have been in contact with anyone with symptoms that they know of. So you're minimizing the likelihood that you have a spreader coming into the office. How else can you minimize a spreader in the office?
Well, it's like we mentioned earlier, set up pods of people that will communicate with each other, whether it's for functioning in business, going on breaks, going to lunch. Everybody should have a group, and these are the people they interact with when they come to the business. That way, if one person gets sick, you have a known number of people to go to and to check on to see if they should either be quarantined or just evaluated for what kind of condition they're in.
How many people do you recommend?
And again, every single individual needs to understand the benefit to them and how they're protecting not just themselves and not just the co-workers in the company, but they're protecting their family also by taking whatever extra measures there are to not get the virus. Again, it's so simple. Assume that everything that every person you come in contact with and every item that you touch that wasn't under your control is covered in virus and treat it as such, which means disinfect it, or when you do touch it, clean your hands before you go back to your business.
Right. So, so how many people would you say should be ideally in these groups?
I don't have an answer to that. I think that depends on the business and on the social interactions. I don't know. Should it be 5 people? Should it be 20 people? It should be a known number of people. Something that'll still work within the business and will allow people. People are people. People need to socially interact. Allow people to have enough people to socially interact with that they won't feel lonely and deprived. Because you've got to protect the mental health of people also. That has become a very big issue during this pandemic. The mental health of people.
Right, we're a very social creature, so we need to be able to be social with each other. So, what about the number to me seems like it might be relevant to how many questions you have to ask each member of your pod in order to be sure that everyone's basically behaving safely, or that no one's.
Do you have any flu symptoms? Has anybody you've been in contact with been sick? Has anybody you've been in contact with someone who's been sick? Those are your 3 questions.
Those are your 3 questions. Okay. All right. So let's move out of the office then. Let's ask if that's the office protocol. What happens for the regular layman who may be working from home? In any case, what do we do for these people, and how do we get them safe within their home and within their circle of friends?
Well, you are safe in your home as long as the people that live there are the only people you have contact with, and they don't have contact with anybody else. So true quarantine. We've talked twice now about creating a social pod. So I won't waste your time going into that again, but you can create a social pod, and those are people that you have intermittent contact with, and you do you take the steps to make sure that there's minimal chance of those people have been exposed to COVID during the known incubation period. When you go shopping, I don't believe in gloves. Gloves are a waste of time, but a mask is a necessity. Wear a high quality mask when you go shopping, and touch whatever you want, and assume that you're covered in virus. And as soon as you leave, before you even get in your car, pull a bottle of disinfectant out of your fingers and out of your pocket and disinfect your hands, palm, back, in between the fingers, nails, etc., all the way up, to your elbows. Go home and take off your clothes. Throw them in the laundry. They could be covered in virus. And go take a shower. You now are protecting your home from being infected with virus.
Right.
Now, when you receive things in your home, like groceries, like in my home, because I want to minimize the amount of time I spend going into stores, I've been having my groceries delivered, which is something I've never done before. And when the groceries get delivered, I'm going to do the same thing in the workplace. Let's say you do the same thing with groceries as you do in a certain situation in a workplace. So groceries come home and you put them down on a counter, or you're working in a workplace and you're processing parts, and somebody brings over a bin of 40 parts that you have to process somehow. Assume this grocery has virus on it. So next to it, have an area of a countertop that you disinfect. Take each of these items, spray them with a disinfectant, and move them over to the clean area. Now they're all virus free. Now take the container they were in and disinfect that and put that aside somewhere. Now take the surface they were on and disinfect that. Now it's clean. Now wash your hands. You're now disinfected. Right. Now your groceries or the parts of whatever you're dealing with are safe to utilize. You've really pretty much guaranteed that you're not going to be bringing virus into your life.
So now what about, I have a lot of friends that are younger people who don't have a partner necessarily and don't want to just limit their social circle to their household. They want to have friends over for dinner. They want to interact with people in a more friendly way with hugs and whatnot. But in order to be safe, they need to sort of limit that circle of people and I think maintain that similar level of protocol for safety in order to do so without dramatically increasing their risk of catching or spreading the virus.
If you socially are in contact and you're in close communication, talking to each other from only a few feet away, and you're hugging, and one of you or both of you have not been really careful who you're in contact with, you're rolling the dice and if you're going to get it or not.
Right.
I mean, there are social groups that get together and ignore all of the safety things of social distancing and wearing a mask, and nothing happens to anybody. And then there's groups that get together, everybody's healthy, 20 people get together, and 15 of them a week later are sick with COVID. You're rolling the dice.
So what if you don't want to roll the dice, but you do have a need for more of a social grooming culture? And so you're trying to come up with a pod that's maybe 10 or 20 people where you all have agreed on the same protocol. It's sort of like expanding your household into a multi-household quarantine.
I'm with you, Stephen. I'm an extrovert and a very social animal. So for me, being in quarantine is torture. I'm very jealous right now of my introvert friends. the introverts love quarantine. So we talked about this already. The people that are in your pod need to simply be quarantined, including yourself, for 2 weeks before you actually get together. And if, let's say you've got a pod of 12 people and you get together socially, and you've got plans on having a dinner party next Saturday night. And so everybody's been in quarantine for 2 solid weeks and really respecting it. You're safe getting together. If one person is not in quarantine, does something, whether it's business or social or does something where they could have been exposed, they're out for that party. They've got to go back into quarantine for 2 weeks before they can be part of the group. Otherwise, you're rolling the dice, and I don't want to be like a horror story here, but for those few people, and it's few people who actually do get the severe sickness. We're not even talking about death here. We're talking about getting the sickness where they have strong symptoms. And that's people in their 20s, 40s, 50s. It's not limited to old people, which is what we thought originally. It's a very unpleasant experience. And there's a big unknown for the future. There appears to be a multitude of permanent physiological disabilities in people that had COVID. Um, an example that I just happened to be reading about is there's an Italian diver, professional diver, 42 years of age, super fit guy. He got mild COVID. He's been better for 4 months now. He can't walk a city block without having to sit down and so out of breath. That may be the rest of his life. So anyone who gets COVID, they may get sick, then they may get better. It is horrible. The sickness is painful. What is his name? One of the broadcasters from CNN, Cuomo. What's his name? Anyhow, I can't remember think of his name. He had
Andrew
it.
Cuomo.
Was it?
Yeah, I think it's Andrew Cuomo.
And
Chris, his brother is
Chris Cuomo. Yeah.
Chris.
Andrew Cuomo is the governor.
Yeah.
So Chris Cuomo had it. He was down in his basement. He had the chills so bad that he broke teeth. Let me just leave it at that. That's a pretty severe symptom.
Right.
So you don't want to get it. I'm a fanatic to try to not get it because it's just not worth it.
Right. So what if people tried to create a multi-household group where they're just like, okay, this household, and this household are now a team, and we don't do anything outside of this 3 household group that's outside of our protocol.
You're safe. In my opinion, if all the individuals are following through, you're safe.
And so you might still have to ask people who are in your circle, when you see them, like
when you see them, when you're going to get together.
When you're going to get together.
Ask them within the last 2 weeks.
Have you broken protocol?
Broken quarantine?
Right. Okay.
So in order for that to be really safe, when you say 3 households,
yeah,
it's got to be three households of people that you truly trust.
Right.
Because this is a very serious illness. Now again, like I said earlier, the danger in this illness is that for most people it's mild. Most people don't get it, or it's extremely mild. That's the danger. It's not being respected. For those 20% that do get it, let's forget about the death card. Let's just go with getting sick. It's incredibly painful, lasts a long time, and you could be a cripple of some kind, like a respiratory cripple for the rest of your life.
Right. Wow. Well, Barry, this has been great, very informative. I think this sets a really great concept or understanding of how to go about being truly safe, really maximizing and your safety and minimizing your chances of being a spreader.
If anybody would like to learn virtually everything that they can do to prevent getting, giving, or spreading the virus, I've created a program, and you can reach it at Stop COVID Spread at Work. StopCOVIDSpreadAtWork.com is the website, and it's a complete program on how you can do everything that you need to do.
Awesome.
There's a whole new mixture coming into society now. That mixture is schools opening up again. A lot of schools are opening up, and that's going to create, in my opinion, as a doctor and scientist, that's going to create problems. In the news just this morning, there's one school where one student symptom-free had COVID, and now 25 teachers are out sick with COVID. That was in the news this morning. So to say that you can open the schools safely is a gamble. We're using the children as guinea pigs.
Right. And you're going to see a lot of politicized, opinions and little anecdotal articles going in either way, because people want to prove a narrative they want. But the truth is, it's a risk.
One of the most dangerous things that's happening in America right now is that this disease has become politicized. In other countries, it doesn't matter how diverse the political parties are, they realize we have a disease, we've got to stop this disease. And so they do whatever it takes to stop the disease. In this country, it has become a political issue, and I don't want to get into that because that's inarguable. That's a political issue. Politically, people are being told, do this safe thing or not do this safe thing. It's a disease. It's a disease. It's a virus. It doesn't care if you're Republican or an independent or a Democrat. We need to stop the disease.
We do. And when we all work together, we can do amazing things. So
we can fix it. It's been done in other countries. If everybody does the right thing, it's predictable how the virus behaves. If you simply do the predictable preventive measures consistently across the board, this virus will be over. But I won't get into the politics of how soon that will happen.
Right. Well, Barry Carlin, thank you so much. This has been very informative.
StopCOVIDSpreadAtWork.com. I'll meet you over there, folks.
All right.